So I've been thinking about something today, a little topic I want to put out, a little statement for the record. So there's been a lot of talk on all sides of this whole Ukraine situation about the bait and bleed strategy, as we see right here. So apparently, this is something that was postulated or described by someone a lot of people should have heard about by now if they're interested in international relations, all that dorky shit. Uh, John Mearsheimer, according to this, wrote in his book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, about the bait and bleed strategy. Basically, it's when one country strategically baits another country, a rival, into a war with a third country. The idea being by baiting that country into a war with another country, and in some cases, even supporting that country, which the country you're baiting is fighting against, you can cause severe harm to that nation. So here it says Russia tried to bait Austria and Prussia into a war with France shortly after the French Revolution, evidenced by Catherine the Great's statement to her secretary in 1791. So apparently, Catherine the Great said to her secretary in 1971, and this, who knows, fact check this, but I'm assuming it's accurate to some degree. I'm going to trust but verify later. I am racking my brains in order to push the courts of Vienna and Berlin into French affairs. There are reasons I cannot talk about. I want them involved in that business to have my hands free. I have much unfinished business, and it's necessary for them to be kept busy and out of my way. So apparently that was Mearsheimer's example of the bait and bleed strategy. And a lot of people know the United States has engaged in this strategy of vis-a-vis the Afghanistan War, in which the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. And the United States had a lot to do with pushing them into that war, and then supported the Mujahideen throughout that war, particularly providing them with loads of Stinger missiles, which were really good at shooting down the Russian helicopters at the time. I think they were using Hind helicopters, an earlier version of the Hind helicopters that they're still using today. And a lot of people credit that war with causing the downfall or contributing greatly. Some people say causing the downfall of the Soviet Union, the Afghanistan War. I tend to disagree with that. Um, I tend to think it may have contributed to the war, certainly, to the downfall. But I think that I don't know. I tend to think that the Soviet Union would have collapsed with or without the Afghanistan War. It might have been a fair bit later, maybe in the early 2000s even. But certainly, if nothing else, the Afghanistan War and the Russians' loss in that war accelerated the downfall of the Soviet Union. And the United States didn't publicly, no United States officials have ever publicly acknowledged that we did support the Mujahideen, but many former officials have come out and basically admitted it. And it's common knowledge at this point. And of course, as we know, the Mujahideen became the Mujahideen became the Taliban. Okay, and one of the Mujahideen that we supported, or one person that we supported, was Osama bin Laden. He was involved. I'm not sure how directly he was involved, but he was there in the 80s fighting against the Russians, as far as I know. Fact check me on that. I believe so, but it could be I'm mistaken. Maybe it didn't come about till later. But definitely the Taliban were the Mujahideen. They became the Taliban. On that, when we invaded Afghanistan, what a lot of people don't understand about Afghanistan is it's almost like going back in time to the feudal times, to the medieval times. And when the Taliban, so yes, Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan, and he had I think just had recently started operating in Afghanistan, because prior to that he was more in Sudan, I believe. But just before the United States invaded, around the time of the September 11th attacks, he did I think he had to flee Afghanistan. Had to flee Sudan or Somalia, and he ended up in Afghanistan. Now, the thing about it is this. The Taliban, that just because Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan doesn't mean the Taliban had anything to do with him. The Taliban is a sort of feudalistic regime, highly decentralized, with high degrees of local autonomy. And anybody can be in Afghanistan and do basically whatever they want at that time. And the Taliban would have little to do with it, or nothing at all. The way the Taliban saw it is, he was there. I don't know. You'd have to look into it, but he was there, and the Taliban had no issues with him. So they let him stay there. Okay. But it's not like they were involved in what Osama bin Laden was doing. There were no Afghans involved in the September 11th attacks. They were all Saudis, and there was a Jordanian mixed in there. I don't know. Maybe there was a Palestinian in there. It's mostly Saudi Arabian citizens. So, that's a little side note on Afghanistan. When we attacked Afghanistan, attacked the Taliban had done nothing wrong, really. They didn't aid and abet Osama bin Laden. They were just there. And what it came down to was there was the remnants of some people that we were in cahoots with back in the 80s. That was the Northern Alliance. Most of them were drug dealers, drug smugglers, stuff like that. They were warlords that made a lot of money off of drugs. And the CIA wanted them back in power. And they put them back in power at the expense of the Taliban, who had eradicated, by the way, opium production for the most part in Afghanistan. So the CIA, with the help of the United States military, uses the excuse of Osama bin Laden having been in Afghanistan to take the Taliban out of power, put their people back in power, the drug producers, and lo and behold, what did we have in the early and mid 2000s? We had a huge heroin epidemic in the United States, in cities like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. I remember. You heard it in the news. Oh, there's this new powerful form of heroin that's inexplicably making its way into the United States. Yeah, sure. But back to the bait and bleed strategy. So arguably the United States, utilized the bait and bleed strategy against Russia during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. And arguably it worked. And less arguably, in my opinion, the United States is using the bait and bleed strategy once again with Ukraine. Although it would seem to be that the people doing the most bleeding aren't the Russians, rather it's the Ukrainians. And the idea, again, would be to cause the Russians to waste a lot of money and a lot of manpower in Ukraine. I mean, we've seen it throughout these last 2 months and 3 months. These mouthpieces of the United States government, the intelligence agencies, these mouthpieces, these stenographers in the mainstream media have been hinting at this the whole time, that the idea is to get Russia involved in a quagmire, like a Afghanistan or Vietnam type quagmire. I've seen it multiple times. Then we have, I'm not going to pull it up at this moment. I mean, I could just pause this and pull it up, but most people have seen it. We have Adam Schiff, that fucking asshole, at the UN a couple years ago saying we need to aid the Ukraine. He said it specifically. We're going to aid the Ukrainians, send them weapons and arms so we can fight, which is not really we, it's really the Ukrainians. But he says we can fight the Russians there instead of fighting them here. Same exact argument that was given for invading Iraq and Afghanistan. So we have that. And then we have this, and I'm going to pull this up because this is really interesting. This is from, what page are we on so I don't lose the page here? We are on page 5. 5. Okay, 5. Summary. So this is the summary of the 2018 National Defense Strategy of the United States of America, sharpening the American military's competitive edge. I think the United States military is more of a paper dragon and more of a black hole of money and money laundering, but that's besides the point. So this was written by the great Mad Dog Mattis, which I think he's kind of overrated, honestly. And right down here it says, part of the strategy is, with our allies and partners, we will challenge competitors by maneuvering them into unfavorable positions, frustrating their efforts, precluding their options while expanding our own, and forcing them to confront conflict under adverse conditions. So that's the bait and bleed strategy. So to me, they're telling you right here what they want to do. And I think most people understand this. Even normies understand this. The sad part is that most normies don't care that innocent people, mostly Ukrainians, are dying because their government wants to play the grand chessboard game. And I don't get how Americans can just sit here and keep letting this happen. And it's no wonder why so many countries around the world, as we have seen, as a little side note, when we called for all these sanctions and we asked the world community to stand by us and ostracize Russia, what ended up happening is most of the world said, hell no, United States. We're going to stay neutral. I think I put it on another video somewhere. I'm going to pause it for this so I can look this up real quick. Okay, so here we have it. Let me pull it up. Right here. I'm going to bring it over here. So this is a map of the countries in the world that have some form of sanctions on Russia. And even most of these don't have really serious sanctions. I mean, they have Hungary on this map. Hungary is still that's Hungary right around here somewhere. I can't. It's kind of blurry. Uh, they don't. They're not. They're still importing oil and a lot of products. South Korea still importing oil and gas. Japan still importing oil and gas. And then here goes, I think it's Guyana, Suriname, Guyana. So I've showed this, I put this on another video, and it just shows you how alone the United States and Europe actually are. Most of these countries don't like us. Latin America hates, hates the United States government and is sick of American interference in their affairs. Africa is sick mostly of Europe and somewhat the United States interfering with their affairs. Most of Asia. You have notably Indonesia, which most Americans have no idea exists, even though it's the fourth most populous country in the world. Very important country. Said, no, we're not getting involved in this. Pakistan said no. As of this, probably the recording of this right now, Pakistan still has not enacted sanctions, but the United States had a temper tantrum and used its incredible influence in Pakistan, garnered through decades of United States, aid in the form of money, basically bribes to that country. So now they ended up somehow finagling the PM Imran Khan out of power, and now they got a new PM coming in, an undemocratic coup, by the way. So they may enact some form of sanctions sometime soon. I don't think even the new prime minister is going to have the political capital to enact serious sanctions. If anything, it will be, token, symbolic sanctions. But look at how alone the United States and Europe is. And you go on the news and they say, oh, the entire world is sanctioning Russia, blah, blah, blah. Give me a fucking break, people. Come on. So here we have right here, basically, the Department of Defense telegraphing exactly what they're going to do. Just, my question is this. Who's really being bled here? I think that this bait and bleed strategy, this amazing strategy, is going to backfire. Bait and bleed works if you get the rival in a prolonged conflict and they lose that conflict. I would say most of the time it's going to work. However, if you get the rival involved in a conflict that they win decisively, generally speaking, when a country wins a war decisively, not all the time, but most of the time, they come out stronger. And this fine young specimen of a man here actually made some good points. First example would be the United States Civil War, an incredibly destructive war. The most casualties ever suffered for the United States in a war. The southern United States was devastated by, General Sherman's march and other, basically the word total. I don't know if the word total war was coined then. I think it might have been. But that's when the idea of total war, when the concept of total war really got its roots. General Sherman saying, war is hell, so get over it. So he went through the South and he just left a trail of destruction, death, and rape, of course. Because what's a good army attacking civilians if not for rape occurring? Happens every time on a massive scale. And then you have the other example he gives, which is true, is Russia after World War. And so, first of all, back to the United States Civil War. After the Civil War, until the early 1900s, the United States experienced, you know, its highest levels of growth in its history. We went from being a basically third world or developing country. We would have been called a developing country at the time of the outset of the Civil War, and by the early 1900s, we were the most powerful country in the world. So destructive wars don't necessarily mean that that country is going to fall apart because of that war, especially if, that country is victorious and wins decisively, as the North did. Now, you could also say a lot of it had to do with good governance by fairly libertarian, by today's standards, anarchist public officials, that got out of the way of economic growth and let the growth explode. And of course, there was a lot of more resources at the time. There was just so much potential, and the government got out of the way and let it go. And we went to being the most economically powerful country in the world. Same thing with Russia after World War II. Russia suffered immensely during World War II, more than any other nation except arguably China. China also suffered greatly during World War II, and a lot of people don't talk about that. But Russia suffered immensely. They did all of the majority of the heavy lifting. Really, it was Russia or the Soviet Union that won World War II. Luckily for the Russians, as with the United States, with the United States, none of the major industrial infrastructure was touched. With Russia, only some of it was touched, a good bit of it, but a lot of their industrial infrastructure, survived unscathed. But they suffered tens of millions, 40 to 60 million casualties. But they won decisively. And after World War II, that was the height of the Soviet Union's power and influence, the 40s and 50s. They were technologically ahead of the United States in many areas. They had a massive industrial base. I think that large part of the Soviet Union had to do with the creeping corruption that comes with any highly centralized regime, but that didn't come until the late 70s and throughout the 80s. So a country fighting a tough war doesn't necessarily mean it's going to cause its demise, so long as it wins. But maybe it's going to end up being, and maybe the Russians know this, maybe the Russians are anticipating this or working towards this end. Maybe this war is going to actually do more bleeding on the United States than Russia. Maybe it's going to be the United States that's going to bleed and suffer, and the West, Europe. That's my proposition here. So we start with something like this. This just came out today. And hopefully it doesn't come up with this stupid paywall thing. Slovakia and Hungary won't back EU sanctions on Russian energy. So this can escalate very quickly. And given how narcissistic these EU officials are, and how they, as Alexander Mercurius says a lot, they have no reverse gear. They only double down after they make a mistake. So this could really fray the EU. I mean, the EU shitocrat bureaucrats are already upset with Hungary and their prime minister. They did everything they could to get him out of power, and he still got elected, I think, by a significant margin. So you're seeing the EU fray and come under strain, and I think my opinion is NATO is as well. So right now, NATO seems to be in the public eye holding together, but I think before this war is over, NATO will also show signs of significant strain. And all these dumbass normies on the internet are talking about how this is unified NATO. I don't think so. I don't think the NATO alliance. It's possible that the NATO alliance could, depending on how big of a facepalm this turns out to be, the NATO alliance could basically become illegitimate. And the EU, what I see happening here in this situation is the EU ministers, the EU bureaucrats, as arrogant and narcissistic as they are going to push back hard on Hungary, threaten Hungary. Who knows? Maybe Hungary will end up leaving the EU and becoming neutral themselves. I think there's some talk with Italy. Italy is kind of upset with the EU as well. So this could be the straw that broke the camel's back for the EU. So already, looks like the EU's bleeding pretty bad. These sanctions are going to cause a lot of economic damage. Inflation was already going up, as anybody who understands economics and has been keeping track of it. Inflation was on the rise in the United States for the last year and a half at least, and in the EU I would say maybe a little less, but about the same. This is going to cause significant inflation. That's going to increase political upheaval. This could be really bad. They're making the inflation worse, causing energy prices to rise further and faster. Macron barely ekes out a win over Marine Le Pen, thanks to the fucking French boomers. It was the boomers that got him elected. Self-serving fuckers. Boomers are the same everywhere. Self-serving fuckers. And I see signs of a lot of problems developing. So it looks like the EU's bleeding. This has exposed Germany's new Chancellor Scholz of being a complete. He's out of his league. He's out of it. He's in over his head. It's readily apparent that Scholz is in over his head. And I'm not a Merkel fan, but being a German citizen as well as a United States citizen, I hate to say it, but I want fucking Merkel back. That's how I feel about that. It's pretty sad to say. Schroeder would be based in this situation also. That's even worse to say. Britain, they've been hysterical about Russia since Catherine the Great. I mean, they're doing exactly what would have been expected. I mean, it looks like this Ukraine deal is going to end Boris Johnson's term in office. They're going to say it's because of the party he had, the party they had during COVID lockdowns and all this. But really, I think this Ukraine war hasn't been good for Boris Johnson. So Europe is bleeding. Next one, United States. Even NPR says Ukraine war drags on. They're losing their optimism. Even the publicly owned NPR. Biden asked Congress for $33 billion. This is after we've already gone through, I'd say, probably close to $20 billion so far. You know, $20 billion so far, maybe 15 being conservative. And now Biden asked for $33 billion. Now, my opinion on this, first of all, is it kind of shows what this war was about for our impeccable leadership in the United States in the first place. And it was about, hey, we can use this as an excuse to take taxpayer money, your money, your and most importantly your children's money and your children's money, and we can give it to our friends in Lockheed and Raytheon. The Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Mr. Face Shield himself, he used to work for Raytheon, or he's on a board for Raytheon or something. Lockheed Martin, I've heard either Lockheed or Raytheon makes the Javelin missile. Maybe both of them make components of it. But, you know, they're going to make a lot of money. I showed in another video some minutes from a quarterly meeting for Raytheon, and this was back in January. They were very excited about future earnings. Okay. They lost Afghanistan, the cash cow that was Afghanistan. They needed something, and they got it in Ukraine. So first of all, what it comes down to is this is another excuse to take your tax money and give it to the weapons companies and the defense contractors. And it's also an excuse to launder money in the form of aid, okay, to Ukraine. Who knows where that money's going to go? You know, no one knows. The United States admitted it. I saw an article the other day, CNN. The United States doesn't know where the weapons are going. They don't know where they're ending up. They're going to end up all over the world. But see, they don't actually care about that. Biden doesn't care. The Congress people don't care. They don't care if the weapons end up in the hands of the Ukrainians. They don't even care if they end up in Russian hands. And let me see if I can find this beautiful picture I saw on Telegraph. One moment. So here we have the Russians who have found an ammunition storage area, an ammunitions depot. And what do we have here? There goes a German Panzerfaust. There goes an American, looks like, I don't know if that's an American weapon. Look at all this. Stinger missiles. These are Stinger missiles. That almost looks like an AT-4. I remember those. There goes a Javelin right there. Okay. Look at this. On this pallet, on this group of pallets alone, what are these? The Javelins are something like $1 million a piece or something like that. How much of your money is that? And here we have the Russians. We just gave the shit to the Russians. How ridiculous is that? How absolutely ridiculous is that? And the politicians don't care because all they care about is getting your money into the hands of their friends in the weapons industry. How many times do Americans need to get scammed? Okay. I don't know. I think what's going to happen in order for the Americans to learn is real economic consequences, and they are coming. And once we have real economic consequences for all of this reckless excess, okay, then maybe people will start looking back and saying, oh, really? And they'll say, we gave all of our money to, we've wasted so much money from big pharma during COVID to this, and the list goes on and on. It literally never ends. That's what this is really about. This is not about bleeding Russia. This is not about bleeding Russia. This is about bleeding you and me, bleeding us, bleeding our futures away from our children and our grandchildren. That's what this is about. This is the consequence of, as Hans Hermann Hope would say, this is what you get with democracy. You get mismanagement of public funds because of high time preference. Read Democracy, the God That Failed. They have actually a audio version on YouTube for free. Look that up, and it's all going to start making sense. But this is absolutely ridiculous. All of this confiscated by the Russians. I'm not sure what that is. All of this is missiles. How many? It's got to be $1 billion just right there. How ridiculous is that? Stinger missiles. Cocoa Beach, Florida. M16, AR-15s. Revolvers. All made in America. Glock. Javelin. That weapon system there is like $1 million or so per javelin. Panzerfaust. I'm not sure what that is. You get the picture. And this is just one of many I've seen. I've seen videos of Russian troops saying, "Thank you, America." I mean, they'll find something to use. They'll use those weapons for training, I'm sure. How ridiculous is that? So that's who's getting bled here, first of all, is the American people. Not first of all, it's Ukraine that's being bled. There will be no Ukraine after this is over. Or if there is a Ukraine, it's going to be maybe less than half the size it was. A mockery of its former self. You know, Ukrainians that cared about their country are never going to forgive the United States and the West. We're going to add one more country to the long list of countries that hate the United States. So that's the first thing that's being bled dry is the Ukrainians. Then it's us, the American people, the American taxpayer. And the thing about it is this. The thing about it is this. We're wasting our time. We're wasting our money at a time when we can scarcely afford to waste our money like this. Inflation is on the rise. Growth is slowing. Minus 1.4% GDP for Q1. Many people are saying it's the beginning of a recession. I'm hearing a lot more talk in the financial media, among the more fringe voices, that we are in stagflation. As a matter of fact, I saw it on Zero Hedge today. I'll pause it again. World's largest shipper. What's the name of this company? It's a weird name. I think it's like a Scandinavian company. Maersk warns about stagflation. So the largest shipping company in the world has come out in a statement. Do they use the term stagflation? They're saying we're assuming a slowdown of the second half, blah, blah, blah. So Zero Hedge, actually, to be fair, it looks like Zero Hedge uses the term stagflation. But they're warning about slowing growth. They're going to blame China, for their lockdowns. But I'm hearing more of the more fringe, not more independent voices. Not You're not going to see the word stagflation used in the financial media. It's not going to be on Bloomberg. It's not going to be on Forbes or Barron's, because their job, believe it or not, okay, is to get you to keep buying financial products from their sponsors. So they're not going to use negative language that's going to make you maybe not put your money into a fund or into a stock, okay? Because they're being funded and sponsored by financial institutions by and large. But you're starting to see it in the independent media more, and the independent media was loath to use, in financial FinTwit and your financial YouTube pages. They're starting to use the word stagflation a lot more. So maybe it's the United States and Europe that are actually being bled by this war and not Russia. By all accounts, it looks to me like Russia is going to emerge from this war victorious, with more territory under their control. Perhaps the entire Black Sea coast of Ukraine, maybe even Odessa. I think that's going to be tough, but we'll see. So, and the other thing is this. Russia has a singular unipolar regime right now that has a singular motivation, whereas in the United States, the country is divided. Okay, we have nascent political movements on the rise. The establishment is barely holding on to their power. The United States is chaotic right now. We don't have a singular objective. We don't have a unified objective. Russia has a unified objective, and that is, in their eyes, to protect their country from NATO and from the United States. That's what it boils down to. The United States is chaos. We have Adam Schiff and his crew going to visit Zelensky because, they want to relive Russiagate and get revenge for being made look like fools for pushing Russiagate. So that's part of their objective. Plus, they're all in with the military-industrial complex. We got Biden, who doesn't know what he's doing. We have the Republicans, many Republicans who are also, going along with this because of their long-standing ties to the military-industrial complex. We have about half, or maybe 40 to 50% of the population, who are supporting this escapade on the part of our government simply because they were told to by the people they revere in the media and on Twitter. But we have a significant portion of this population who are wholly against it. Much more people than would be apparent. J.D. Vance, who is opposed to this war, just won the Republican primary for Senate in Florida. That's a bellwether, folks. So, and then we have this, one of my favorite things I've seen so far today. Pope Francis says NATO started war in Ukraine by barking at Putin's door. And, I'm a sort of Catholic, and I do go to Catholic church, and I do believe in God, and I do believe Jesus existed. I wrestle with the idea of him being the Son of God. I wrestle with that, so forgive me. I'm not all there yet. Maybe I never will be, but I'm always going to be true to myself, and I do believe God. I just prayed to God. For a woman or a man, I don't know who, I saw on Gab that was giving their story about how they have a bunch of tumors and they're 23 years old, and I had to stop and pray. They were asking for prayers, and I had to stop and I had to pray for them, and it really moved me. I think it was a good prayer session, a very short one, but I felt like I really made some sort of connection, and I asked God to just bless this person. I can't tell God what to do, but I can tell them to please bless this person. And hopefully God does uh, what hopefully God allows this person to live the rest of their life. So but I haven't been a fan of Pope Francis because he's kind of a commie, like a lot of Latin American Catholics were very involved in leftist movements, mainly because they were opposing the United States. They call him. It's kind of unfair to call him a commie, but he does come from that tradition of Latin American Catholic, officials that supported movements that were opposed to U.S. imperialism in Latin America. That's one reason why on this picture here you don't see any Latin, besides this country, which I believe used to be a French colony, you don't see any Latin American countries getting on board with the sanctions. But yeah, the Pope came out and said, you can look up this article yourself, but this says it all. The headline says it all. So I have to give him a clap for that one. Best thing he said during his whole tenure as Pope. They're doing their best to keep that. That happened yesterday. So there you have it. So, in closing, the United States helped start this war with the help of Britain, I'm sure, and probably Germany, in order to bait and bleed the Russians into a quagmire that would bring about regime change. They've even said over and over again they want regime change. And what did they end up doing? They ended up unifying Russia politically and disunifying Europe and setting the United States down the path of economic ruin more quickly than it would have if left to its own devices. The economic ruin was coming anyway because we're reaching the end of a credit cycle, is what it comes down to. But yeah, so I think it's who's bleeding who here. I don't know. And I'm wondering how maybe the Russians saw this. I think what happened, so a synopsis is Russia came in full head on in the beginning, hoping to just get the Ukrainians to surrender. And I do believe that their move towards Kiev with only 60,000 troops at the most was probably a diversionary move to keep troops locked down in Kiev so they can go and encircle the ones in eastern Ukraine. Because no military planner would send 40 to 60,000 troops to siege a city of 3 million people that is as spread out as Kiev is. Okay, so obviously either one of two things, or maybe both things. Maybe they hoped for Ukraine to surrender when they saw the initial assault, the initial invasion. That didn't happen, so they kept the troops over there in Bucha and all those places in order to keep Ukrainian forces tied down. And then once they got Mariupol under control, which was a big battle, they can now move those troops back, and they can come in with those troops from Mariupol and go up to Donbass, to the Luhansk region, and start encircling troops there. So that's my synopsis of what happened. But maybe they also said, hey, never get in the way of your enemy when he's making a mistake. I've heard that phrase used a couple times. Maybe they're saying, hey, United States is bleeding its coffers, its treasury dry. Europe is showing signs of disunity and strain. So let them continue with these unfair sanctions. Let the United States continue sending weapons to the Ukrainians. Most of those weapons will never make it to the front lines. And the ones that do end up in the hands of the Russians. Let them do it. Maybe they're saying, let's slow down this war. Let's be more methodical. Let's let the United States waste more money. I didn't even get into this Lend-Lease program that they want to restart. They want to do basically, they want to give Ukraine a blank check for basically a line of credit that they're obviously never going to pay back. So this is getting out of hand. I think it's the United States and Europe getting bled dry here, not Russia. And of course, I have to say it again, Ukraine, the people that have got the shittiest end of this stick are the Ukrainians. God bless them. God bless the fight that they put up. They did put up an amazing fight so far. I mean, it's pretty impressive, the fight that they put up, but they never could have won this war. The United States knew it. The United States officials knew that this would be devastating to Ukraine. Okay, so that's my piece. That's my thoughts. I am out.